bonjour les autres. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate this. Merci aux organisateurs et à vous pour être ici ce matin. My French is terrible right now, so I'm going to go back to English as well. How are you guys all doing? Was that not a fabulous talk by Manuel? So thank you again. That was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So the time is ticking, so we're going to get moving here. So I am here to talk about research, but I'm actually looking at it from the lens of designers. How many designers in the room? Quick show of hands. Awesome, okay. How many researchers? Yeah, my peeps are here. I love it. I love it. All right, so why become a designer? I always ask this question because typically research is not sort of like in the forefront of what we talk about, at most conferences, unless it's precisely a research conference. But we ask the question, why become a designer? And most people will say, I want to solve problems. Make sense? Everybody sort of see that, right? I want to solve problems, and I like being creative. I want to create. And there's a lot of things that we hear, and we realize that right off the bat, people are fascinated, especially designers, are fascinated with this concept of discovering, defining, and most importantly, differing. Really looking at how they can be different from just other designs. Because you don't want your design looking like everybody else's. That's just not okay. But the reality of it is I actually feel really badly for designers. I mentioned this at the table yesterday when we were having dinner. Because a lot of designers, and you can look into yourselves or think about people who you know are designers, a lot of designers are often tasked with doing what they have to do, and not all of them really love what they do. Let's talk about that a little bit further. So just a quick introduction to myself. I come in from Twig and Fish. It's a research practice in Boston. We are a qualitative research practice. So you'll hear me say research, and I am actually implying qualitative research. Quantitative research is just as important, but qualitative is incredibly important because we do want to go deep into people. We want to understand who people are. Who are humans? Not as users. So you'll notice I don't use the word user research because I don't want to make the assumption that I want to learn only from users. I need to learn from everybody. So we actually call it human-centered research. It's very focused on understanding humans. Let's also be really clear, we're not a pub, because we get asked that quite often. Are you a pub? No, actually. But come and have a drink with us afterwards, and we'll probably talk about research as well. Have to put that in there. But here's a question. If I ask you designers, where do you fall? So a lot of designers, I'm going to be very, very bold and say that you have this concept of passion. You're passionate about what you do. You love what you do. And you also have a sense of skill. So quite honestly, I think we can agree that many of you fall here. And some of you might go, yeah, I'm not as skilled, I'm not a little, but you're not zero. And zero is a terrible number sometimes. So we're focusing on some. You have a sense of passion, and you have a sense of skill. I bring this up because BJ Fogg has a fabulous behavior model that we actually employ quite often. And my question to you is, how can we be empathic to inspire designers, to get their behavior to change a little bit, to get them to be more positive, more motivated, more excited about actually doing what they want to do, which is to solve problems. And if we look at this a little bit further, he actually uses an equation. I am going to tell you that this slide always makes me so happy because I suck at math, and I feel like I'm going to be very mathematical for all of 2 minutes. I know. I look like I should be good at math, but I'm not. So let's talk about this. So if we talk about behavior, his hypothesis is you actually have a combination of 3 things. You have motivation, you have aptitude, and you need some sort of trigger. I think we've identified a motivation, which is passion. We all are quite passionate. We've also identified an aptitude, which is skill. You have a sense of skill. You can design. But the trigger is the one that's a little bit funny. And I want to actually go into that a little bit further. Between friends, I think I just mentioned that the behavior with the motivation and aptitude is mostly positive. That first part is positive. But here's where it gets really cool, right? Because if you have the last one, the trigger, be negative, what happens to behavior? There's the math, guys, see? It's negative, right? It's very exciting. So we look at that and we go, okay, what do you mean by a negative trigger? Let's look at some really, really common examples of negative triggers. How many of you felt that you've had to design with constraints? Right? A sense of, you have no time, get it done. We have no budget, get it done anyway. We have no ability to be curious. I love that. We're not given time to be curious. We're not given and afforded that moment. How about designing based on stereotype? I love it. We had a presentation to a person, and this woman who was from South America said, yeah, but everybody in South America loves color. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's good to know, but that's a bit bold. How about that one loud voice? It needs to be this way because I told you so. And they dictate it. You're smiling, and I know you know what I'm talking about. And then how about designing without a connection? How many of you sometimes feel you're designing and you actually don't even know what the hell you're designing for? Who? What's going on here? So the problem is then, negative triggers makes design feel like a mandate. And that is a problem, because guess what? People fizzle out. We lose our joy for what we do, and if at the very least, we have to love what we do. So I'm not going to leave you in the negative. I'm actually going to bring you over to the positive, and I'm going to put it right out there. What Manuel actually just presented about is also a positive trigger. But he did mention a few things. How about starting your design anchored in a human story? I'm going to actually pause on that one for a second, because that's the one that most designers struggle to do. How about designing based on an analogous experience? So Manuel had just mentioned going outside of your space, giving yourself that affordance to actually look at what other people do. How lovely is it when you can actually see somebody else who's not a competitor, but you can actually see what they're doing, and you see that, oh my goodness, this is fabulous. I can actually learn something from them. It's a big thing to be inspired. How about designing with context and actually getting a sense for? I can give you countless examples, so for anybody who's interested in very pointed examples for these, please come and talk to me, because they'll just keep on coming out. People who have no idea what the context is. And meaningful scope. Sometimes you just don't know what you're actually designing for. What's that scope? What's those boundaries? Nobody's told me, and I have to just put my head down and get it done. There are few companies that actually can get this done comfortably. A lot of the times, the norm is that people feel like their faces are pressed up against the wall. But these are not that difficult to do, guys. Because guess what? When you have good research, qualitative research that actually is done properly, it can actually promote all of these positive triggers. And the best part about it is, even back to what Manuel was just saying at the end, where you actually go through a design and you actually just go through and you just sort of put crap together, there is a cost to that. There is a very huge cost, which is that you lose people's trust. People won't use your design anymore. So take that cost and put it into research, and you avoid a lot of the problems that are there. I'm going to put this out there. This might be contentious to some of you, and please talk to me, because I love this discussion. I do not believe in the UX unicorn. I do not sort of subscribe to that theory of designers have to do research and design and everything. I believe these are actually two separate roles, because researchers really want to unpack the complexities of people without seeking to solve. If I want to learn about Jen, I really don't care how she uses my product. But what I do want to do is understand who she is. What makes her world tick? What's important to her? Maybe if she buys from Amazon, yes, it's interesting for me to see how she connects with Amazon, but does she also have other concerns? Maybe she's concerned about the fact that Amazon is actually creating a lot of waste with cardboard boxes, and people are bothered about that. These are ways for us to inspire the designers to solve more problems, because problems abound everywhere. And designers in our world seek to solve. So when designers actually do research and they actually are burdened with that design of the research study and have to conduct it and actually facilitate it and put it all together, you'll find that a lot of times, as a designer, you will jump right into solution. You won't take the time to understand who it is that you're studying. So as a designer, go along. Be the person who goes and just soaks in the human story. Do all the observing, do all the note-taking, and let somebody else, who's a researcher, actually manage that study design. So if we take that a step further, I say that when those two roles are blurred, and now we're asking designers to code as well, why the hell not? Why don't they just manage their own projects? Just be one person and run the whole company. That's sort of where we seem to be going. So a really quick study, I was talking to David actually when he invited me, and I want to just give you a very quick study that we did that sort of encapsulates some of these concepts that I've gone over. So I'm in from Boston. The city of Boston right now is being faced with a housing crisis because it's getting very, very expensive for middle-income people to actually live downtown and actually buy places downtown. This is not unlike many, many cities around the world, but it's very interesting because when we sat down with them, they right away said, you know, we're dealing with the middle-income housing crisis. This is the mayor's office. It's part of new urban mechanics. And what they said was, we have a problem with middle-income housing. So I'm like, okay, who are middle-income people? Like, how do you define them? I don't know about you, I did not come up to Sylvain and said, hi, I'm Meena, I'm middle-income. Nice to meet you. I don't know what middle-income is. I don't know how to define that. So right off the bat, that is something that goes off in our head. Again, the poor designer who has to design something for middle-income when they don't even know what the hell it means. So think about that for a second. But as we unraveled this, we realized that they were actually putting together details about housing that are all numbers based. How many people are in your house? What is the square footage? What is your age? How many kids do you have? And you're just like, really? I'm going to ask you to think, all of you, when you had to find a place either to rent or to buy, did you think about numbers first? Or did you think about the neighborhood? Did you think about public transit? Did you think about schools nearby? Did you think about really cool pubs to go to in the evening? It's probably more connected to emotion and attitude than it is to anything else. So starting with numbers is how most cities work, and this one actually needed to be fixed. So what we actually did was, we applied, again, a structured research approach. Now, if I ask all of you who do research, my ask of you always is you need not use this approach, but if you do not have an approach that you can actually say out loud to people, and people are like, oh yeah, you're in Gather, yeah, got it. If there's no universal language in where you work, that is a problem. Because that means it's not being distributed. That responsibility is not being distributed. And research actually has to be democratized across an organization for it to be truly valuable everywhere. And it doesn't matter whether you're a designer, developer, it doesn't matter. Everybody needs to speak this language. In our world, this is the language that we use. So we start with a quick align phase, and what we do there basically is make sure everybody's on the same page. How many of you have ever received, especially the researchers in here, have received an ask that actually makes no sense? You don't know what to do with. And you're like, I don't really understand what this is all about. But they're telling you to run a method, and they're asking you to do it really quickly. So if we align everybody, it's a very quick session of getting everybody's, all the thoughts out of their minds. We align everybody. It's a very easy way to make sure everybody's on the same page and also keep things efficient. Once we get that, then it's a matter of planning, making sure you identify your sample properly, making sure you recruit for them properly. It's not as simple as saying, hey, the back row there, let's come on down and let's do some research together. We actually do need to be mindful of who it is that informs what it is that we're doing. Also, we have to look at then taking that and being able to make sure we planned very well and move it forward in terms of Gather. We want to be able to go and meet with people and get them to articulate their thoughts. Another differentiating factor of the way we work is we focus not on just the ask of a question. Because if I was to ask this gentleman up here, tell me about the last time you invested, he's going to look at me and go, right, invested, financial investment. How many of you think about financial investments 24/7? It's not going to be where your head is at. So I need to give him time to come into my world, to come in and say, okay, let me think about this for a second, and give me a few seconds. And we have to be empathic to that person as well, so that we make sure that they can share their thoughts openly with us. And so we make sure that we gather, but you notice the designers are there with us every step of the way. They don't have to do the work, they simply have to listen to all the stories. Because when designers hear stories, they hear problems. And when they hear problems, guess what? They want to solve them. That's great. And then they have to, by the way this process works, if you come and sit down with us during the session and listen to the human story, you must be there to analyze it as well and contribute your thoughts. It's not enough for you to go, okay, where's the final? Where's the deliverable? It's in Dropbox, it's in Drive. No, you need to be there with us and talk, and it's socializing that human story. It's making sure everybody uses good, neutral language. It's not that I had somebody come into my session and, oh, that was the weirdo at 2 o'clock that came in. No, we're not gonna define that person as a weirdo. We're gonna think about the language we use to describe the people, and we're gonna dig deep and make sure we describe them well. And then basically, once you have done that, really that's where the fun is. That's where everybody gets the inspiration, because you're talking about that human story. And then you seek to apply it, not to present it, not to report it, to apply it, to move it forward into design. And this gives design that anchor, that ability to say, oh, you know what, I can tell you actually about the human story. I can tell you why I love the fact that you used the word evidence. I have evidence now. And it's not just my evidence, it's my team's evidence, because many of us saw the same thing. Because if all of us collectively see the same thing, we could all collectively be biased, there is value there, but you talk about it and sort of unravel those details and call each other out on your biases and make sure that that is mitigated as much as possible. So this is our 5-phase approach. Just to give you an idea, what we were able to do was go into people's houses, spend 3 hours with them in context, and talk about their lifestyle. Nobody's going to just answer, what kind of house would you like me to build you in Montreal? And you're going to go, a house with bedrooms? And it's a very hard question to ask somebody. But if instead I'm like, hey, I want to learn more about you. Tell me about yourself. And by the way, before we meet, pick one object in your house that really defines you, that tells us who you are. So this one woman, I remember those boots so well. She's a 3-time cancer survivor, and she marched up Kilimanjaro in those boots. They define who she is. And it gives her a springboard to be able to tell us about those rich details about her life that is so important. We had so many different people share different artifacts, collages, a lot of interesting note-taking that took place, and made sure that there were shared canvases that we actually had between the participant and ourselves, and made sure the designers were right there with us. And they're taking notes, and we are taking notes, the participant is taking notes, and everybody is now collaboratively thinking about what a lifestyle is and how we might actually progress towards ultimate solution for housing. What we ended up doing is, and back to the Gestalt principle, I was smiling when you said that, patterns are also with people. We can also notice patterns with people. And this is a lot of what makes qualitative research so fascinating, is if I meet a few people, I can actually understand what are some of those patterns that bring these people together, what makes them interesting as a group. So we use a very simple approach called a spider diagram, sort of like a 2x2 on steroids. But it's really talking about all the different aspects of people and plotting almost every individual person that we met with on these diagrams to look for like shape. Now you can say, well, hold on, did you plot it? Well, what if somebody plots it differently? And no, it's actually all of us plotting it individually and then comparing how we actually believe that person was and discussing where discrepancies might lie. And that way, again, what do? It's just one more platform to get people to talk about the stories they just observed. It's one more way to say, yeah, I actually met Anna. She is a medical student. She actually had a very, very interesting drawer in her room where she opened it and everything for her tea is there because she literally goes over to Mass General Hospital and comes bouncing right back and literally doesn't talk to anybody and goes to her bedroom, and her bedroom is her haven. She needs to have everything at easy access. It's about quick access. That is what she's all about. And for any of you who have been to Boston, you'll know it is a medical mecca. We have so many medical students coming through, as well as college students with the numerous number of colleges and universities we have. So this is a very prevalent thought. So you can see the sort of the ugliness on the right-hand side. We had everybody sort of plot theirs by hand. And then we made them a little bit more beautiful for everybody to talk about further. And we noticed that there was themes, thematic findings that we could take away from everybody. Just in case you're wondering, though, you might go, wow, that sounds really awesome, Meena, but what the hell did you do with the information after that? Don't forget, the last step is apply. So we did actually discuss openly with the city after they had already participated in drawing all these fabulous diagrams. We had them come to us again and say, okay, what next? Well, guess what? Then they involve the construction people, then they involve the builders, the planners, all these other people that have to be a part of this. And if you do visit Boston, you'll find that there's a really interesting, sort of a mobile unit, if you will, called an UHU. It's called an Urban Housing Unit. And they actually have them plunked in a whole bunch of different places in the city. And you can actually walk around, walk right in, so you can sort of see here there's a little ramp leading up to it. And you walk right in, and you get a sense of what the design of that house might be. And you can comment on it, and people are waiting there to go, hey, what do you think about it? And Pierre might go, oh, you know what, I actually want to be able to sort of move between the kitchen and the open space here, but is this wall movable? Oh, it could be, tell us more about that. And they get to actually dig deeper in with the people based on all of the data that we were able to share with them. It was really fascinating for us also because the city of Boston, and generally cities, do rely more on quantitative data, which is not a bad thing. But when you cannot describe the person that you are servicing and serving, that is a big problem. And they were very brave to actually pivot and say, maybe we need to do some qualitative research. They are now a huge inspiration for so many cities, including the city of Montreal. So it's a really, really great thing to be able to say there was, organization in a 5-phased approach, but within each phase, you know that there's a lot of area for creativity. Researchers also need to be creative because at the end of the day, we have to be able to get somebody to open up and trust us when trust is at an all-time low. So in this particular situation, we were able to expose raw emotion. We were able to share potential of where they could go. We were able to create the sense of holistic meaning. What does it mean for people when they're middle income? We understood a little bit more about this whole kind of bucket called middle income because even in cities, they don't really know how to define the middle income. So let's go at it from the kind of people who live in the city. How would you describe them? And then most importantly, unraveling gratuitous terms. I always laugh. How many of you designers have had to go, hey, go and make this really creative, okay? It's got to be a usable interface. It's got to be intuitive. You're like, what the hell does that mean? Like, how do I do that? If we are not aligned on these descriptions, we have to be able to bring meaning to them. And then, by the way, I will measure you on how intuitive it is when I don't understand what intuitive means in the first place. It just gets worse as you go down the path. So my quick sort of closeout for this is I ask you then, it makes sense, and I stand up here very biasly in saying it makes sense, but it's consistently omitted from every major process. People need to cut something out. The first thing to get cut out is research. And I got to tell you, that's like a dagger to my heart. I don't understand why. And I do understand that people feel that qualitative research is ambiguous. It's very abstract. It's very messy, for lack of a better word, because people are messy. But if I expect each one of you to fit into a nice box with a red bow on it, then I'm sorely mistaken. It's not going to work that way. So it's incredibly important to reduce and sort of mitigate this concept of ambiguity and bring more tangible to how we actually define and design for people. So in closing, I'd say research in our minds really anchors everyone, but specifically designers, to that human story. When a designer can actually reach deep and go, I was able to meet with Gwen, it's this lady who is 65 years old and she's African American and basically moved back to Roxbury after living in, all over the world because she said, I'd rather be in a place where I know where the problems are and be familiar with the problems around me than be not surrounded by things that I don't understand. So familiarity was very, very important to her. But it's important to really appreciate those details in the story. So I talk a little bit, and I was thinking about how to approach this talk, because Manuel did a lot about mechanics, about the details of how to, but I actually dwelled a little bit more on the mindset. I ask you all, think about the mindset that you need to be able to welcome and appreciate and understand that human story. Think about your own lives, think about your own jobs and what you do. It's really, really important to be able to sort of include that in and rely on it when you really need to propel yourself forward. So for us, qualitative research is a very positive trigger. And we have enough proof where people have leveraged it and are really able to move things forward. Some companies who are doing some phenomenal things at all different levels of size and all different types of verticals. Thank you so very much for your time. Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, on l'applaudit bien fort, bravo! Nice, bravo!
If you guys want to chat me up afterwards, I'd love to chat more about this. So.
Well, no, but let's chat some more because Meena, I don't know about you guys, je sais pas pour vous, but I've actually read something very different in your own presentation. As a business leader, as a decision maker, as the key holder of financial resources and the like, to me, it was, the epiphany was that research is not only empowering designers, but research, the way you expressed it, could empower the decision makers themselves. Yeah. With true human stories, first of all, so that they are more convincing. Manuel told us sometimes it's more important to explain your ideas and to sell, you use the word sell if I remember well, you sell your ideas than the ideas themselves. And the human stories that your research can reveal, and you gave a couple of fascinating and touching examples, provide ways to tell stories, to sell ideas. That's number one, I thought. Number two, it was the notion of trigger. Sometimes as corporations, as institutions, we push for ideas without really considering the actual, not users, but humans that we're trying to help, actually. And the trigger of knowing really what's going on and the life of the people you're trying to help can make decision makers, not just designers, but much more powerful change agents and triggers of improvement for the life of humans. So
I love this. Luke is going to give this talk next time.
So for those two ideas, not just for designers, but for decision makers, I thank you very much. Big round of applause for Meena, ladies and gentlemen. Meena, on a des questions pour vous. Encore une fois, sli.do, sli.do. Reste avec moi, Meena, reste avec moi. We have a couple of questions from the audience before moving on. I'm sorry, I'm switching. How do you communicate the results of your research to make sure designers grab the human stories behind it? Format, tone, so how do you go about that?
That's a great question. So as I sort of quickly presented the 5 phases to you guys, in Gather, when we actually go and conduct data gathering with actual participants, we make sure the designers are there with us. So they're hearing the stories just as much as we are. And this is regardless. This process can be done regardless of whether you're external to a company as a researcher or internal as a researcher on staff. But if we think about it, the designers come with us and they grab as much of the story that makes sense to them. And obviously we all have our biases. It's very well noted. But when we come together in Analyze, we are deconstructing those stories and we're really thinking about directions and aspects to focus on. So you're really tearing apart these stories to bring more meaning, knowing ultimately that you have something to solve for. But by digging deeper into these stories, we honestly have designers come away from Analyze itself sort of understanding what's going on. And a lot of times they are either presenting or co-presenting with us when we actually have to sort of do our final, readout. The shape it takes all depends on the type of data. So the spider diagrams that I showed you here, yes, we had, the PowerPoint deck to make sure that everything was documented in terms of what the research study was and how it was designed. But then we actually had interactive posters. And because if you work for the city of Boston, you also have to be a resident, we actually had everybody go through the exact same material that we had presented to the residents. And they could actually see which shape they belonged to. And that became a way to get people to get into it, to converse, to become a part of it. And it was really exciting because for some of them, they are numbers driven. They're more comfortable with numbers. This gave them a chance to bring a little bit more meaning to something more tangible. And they could interact with it. So basically in this situation, it was posters. Sometimes it's actually small worksheets and artifacts. Sometimes we move right into like ideation. So if we look at design thinking processes, we move right into ideation and we really get people to, okay, tell more of the story. How does this relate to the solution? How can we ... and fill in the blank. So it all depends on which product and what we're actually doing and solving for. But typically, we make sure that everybody is along for the ride.
Meena, when we have you here, it's so easy to be convinced and sold. I mean, you are fascinating. On était pendu à tes lèvres. But now we're going to walk away and be alone in the real world. We're not going to have you to try to convince our teams and clients to do qualitative research. How do you convince those businesses and clients to go ahead with qualitative research? And what could we do? What argument or one story could we bring to be convincing on that?
That's another great question. So the one thing that we really focus on with research is that, and we actually even avoid the word research because to some people research just feels like a kind of thing. So really, at the basis, research helps you answer questions. If you have questions, you're trying to get answers. But if you look at questions and answers, the first thing we ask people is, how do you get answers today? Let's not worry about research, let's not talk about it. What is your approach to getting answers? And a lot of times, we'll ask them about knowledge sources then. What type of knowledge sources do you tap into? Oh, you know, I spoke to Jen because she told me a story about something and she's our CEO, so I sort of trusted her. Okay, so that's sort of secondhand information. So what else? Oh, I read, you know, a Forrester report or a Gartner Group report, and that was interesting. Well, that's third-party information. And people will cite all of these different knowledge sources. But the next question we ask them is, what is your confidence in that answer that it's giving you? And that's where it gets a bit dicey, because people are like, oh, you know, it's pretty good. And we're like, okay, well, tell us more about that, because we're asking, obviously, for a reason. But what happens is when people don't have a lot of confidence, I like to think of it like a graduated cylinder. And if you don't have a lot of confidence and you still need to fill the cylinder, you fill it with bias and assumption. It's very common. We stuff in things. Oh, we have a gut feeling that this is the right way to go. But gut is not going to take you that far. And it might take you on one iteration of your design, and everybody goes, see, we did it without research. That's great. But after a while, you're going to tumble, because what happens is as your confidence reduces, your assumption and your bias increases. And all it takes is one or two people on the team to go, I don't believe this is the right way to do it, and that makes everybody stop and think. So it's important to have these discussions, because when we don't have high confidence, it becomes a bit of an issue. And a lot of times, if you have actually watched somebody, if I've watched Manuel use a particular design that I have put together, and I've had this discussion, or I understand his world of presenting and how he presents and what kind of, you know, podium he's looking for, and I sort of understand his world, and I'm designing podiums, then maybe I can actually feel better about that. I can have more confidence. It's back to the word evidence that he raised. We need confidence in that evidence. But when it's hearsay, right? There's a company we worked with in Boston that's a medical device company that has a device that you insert into people to blast tumors. On a 50-person design team, 2 people have seen somebody use their product. Ooh. I'm like, shit, I hope I don't get cancer. And I don't want to use your product. Like, I'm totally messed up if I have to use your product, because they're like, we don't even know. And then they found out that doctors were bending the instrument when they knee up. So guess what? Yeah, the instrument's left inside of you and they close you up. That's great. So these are real problems that we cannot afford to have. And it doesn't take a lot of effort. But every every person in the company. I would remove the word designer and think every person in the company needs to be able to tell a human story and have that sense of confidence sort of estimated. And that's how we go about it.
On l'applaudit bien fort, mesdames et messieurs. Merci beaucoup, Meena. Merci, merci. Bravo. Meena Kothandaraman, mesdames et messieurs.